So, good evening. Welcome to the UE Bristol Exhibition and Conference Centre. I'm Anne Dawson. I have worked with Andrews on a number of these sorts of events, and I'm delighted to be invited back. And my day job is that I'm the head of the media school at the University of Gloucestershire. I'm going to let my panel introduce themselves.
So, good evening. I'm David Westgate. I'm the Group CEO of the Andrews Property Group.
Hello, I'm Karen Press. I'm a tax manager at Smith & Williamson.
Hello, I'm Martin Blake. I'm the Land and New Homes Director.
Hello, I'm Alison, Nunez, Managing Director for Lettings, Leasehold and Asset Management.
And I'm Paul Bumford, Financial Services Director for Andrews Mortgage Services.
Thank you, panel. So the way this is going to work, we've got about an hour. I'm going to be talking to the panel, but we're very keen to have our audience join in. So this is as interactive as it can be. And our audience is more than those of you here. We're joined also by hopefully a large number of people via YouTube. So we'll be taking your questions. We'll be taking questions via YouTube as well. So please do, if as the debate goes on, or as the conversation goes on, please do feel free to join in and ask a question. Let's talk about Brexit. So the last time I sat with a panel of people from Andrews, before David was the group CEO, it was pre-Brexit, and we were all surprised by the result, I think. Okay, so Brexit is in the process of happening. So I think generally, let's start with what the impact might be on the property market generally in the UK. And David, I'm going to start with you.
Okay, thank you, Anne. So I think the first interesting place to start is that Brexit hasn't actually happened yet. What's happened is we've had a referendum back in July. As we all know, the politicians are still arguing amongst themselves what this actually looks like. And one of the issues we've got in property is that property is based on confidence. Because we've got a probable 2 years of negotiation with Europe, one of the issues in property is that when the confidence slightly ebbs away, there's a bit of uncertainty in the marketplace. But being positive in the property industry, I believe that's a great opportunity for people that are interested in property, particularly in investment. We don't honestly know what's going to happen over the next 2 years. My preference would be a soft exit from the European Union. Now we've decided to move out, and that there's some sensible decisions made at government and at the Bank of England and with our politicians to find a smooth path through that journey. So I think for landlords in this room, it's actually quite an exciting time to seize opportunities in the marketplace, as there's still a little bit of uncertainty in the marketplace.
Martin.
Well, I can only comment really on the current state of the market from a land and new homes perspective, but the day after Brexit, I had 2 appointments with some big developers, and they both cancelled and said, I'm sorry, we can't, we've got emergency board meetings. And that was on the Friday. On the Monday, they both phoned to apologise for cancelling the appointment, but said, we can't believe what a fantastic weekend we've had in terms of sales. And really since then, from a new homes perspective, it's continued to be very, very positive. A lot of developers started to pull back on acquiring land. A lot of land deals were put on hold. But actually, they're now ploughing full steam ahead. And they, from a business point of view, they're very confident in the future. So from my perspective, and from a land and development perspective, it's still very good.
Alison, from a lettings point of view, what are you seeing?
Obviously, lettings is dependent on investment is in stock, and we are seeing a lack of stock in the market at the moment. But investing in property is extremely sound. Finding the right investment, if you can afford to invest, obviously, is the most important thing. But I pretty much mirror what David says. We're seeing lots of confidence still in the marketplace, but it's more about finding the right property more than anything.
And Paul, from a general kind of economic perspective, the perspective of mortgage opportunities, what are you seeing?
So prior to the Brexit vote, there was both sides saying it's going to be like this or it's going to be like that. Brexit happened, and the world didn't collapse. Pretty much on lending and the mortgage side, it is pretty much as it always was. Money is still available, fairly easy as long as you fit criteria. The banks and building societies are fairly optimistic about where 2017 will be. They're fairly optimistic about where interest rates will be. So to reflect what the panel have said, as long as you go into buying a house or buying a buy-to-let for the right reasons and look at it as a long-term investment, Brexit won't at this point in time have had too much of an impact on the market. And as David said, really Brexit hasn't happened yet. We've got 2 years of discussion and debate, but I expect the market and lending to be pretty much where it has been throughout 2016. Pretty solid, pretty steady, and money available.
Okay, so if therefore property remains on an upward trajectory without a great deal of change, there is talk in some camps about property prices becoming increasingly unrealistic for the market. Can they really keep rising?
Well, the estimates for this year, despite Brexit, are house price inflation at about 8%. So we're not seeing anything in our conversations with any of our clients where that should change for next year. Bottom line factor, as I'm sure Martin knows, is we're not building enough property. I think this year housing starts on about 160,000, 170,000 against a government target of 240,000. So, the appetite and demand for property is still there. In our branch network, applicants on sales and lettings, haven't changed at all. So that supply and demand factor is still very prevalent in the marketplace. So therefore, pricing, I'm afraid to say, will continue to increase, which is not particularly good news for first-time buyers, but for investment, capital growth is potentially a good thing.
Paul, have you got anything to add to that?
Only really to sort of reflect what David's saying. The UK housing market for a long time has always had more demand than it's had supply. So the question was, how unrealistic is it? Well, what is unrealistic? If you take London out of the marketplace, because that's a marketplace on its own, steady rises of 2, 3, 4% are pretty common ground at the moment. I don't think anybody can really say what is unrealistic, because whilst people fit lending criteria, whilst wages go up and people can buy and get more, I don't think there is a ceiling on an unrealistic level for house buying at the moment.
Okay, so predictions. I know it's difficult when you know you're being filmed and someone's going to pick this up in 3 years' time and say, aha. So let's talk about predictions for, say, 2 to 3 years' time. What would you say, percentage of value?
What, house prices going up?
Yeah.
I'm not going to put a percentage on it, obviously, but I'll go back to what I said earlier. If people in the room are looking to invest in the long term, and you should only really be looking to invest in the long term, because short term brings immediate risk, whatever you're investing in. If you're investing for the long term and markets remain where they are, housing will remain a good investment.
I think the only thing to add to that is that there is an issue in the marketplace at the moment about stamp duty, and I believe that housing transactions for this year will be about 1.3 million. Next year it's predicted to go down to about 1.2 million. And again, it's this supply and demand imbalance, and if there's less transactions, less property coming to market for both sales and lettings, inevitably that price is going to continue to rise. As to what percentage that is, if house price inflation this year is 8%, it's not going to exceed that, I wouldn't have thought, but certainly anywhere up towards that.
It might be a good time, Karen, for you to just remind everybody what the position is with stamp duty, particularly for those in the audience who are, thinking of entering the market. So a quick refresh from you would be great.
Obviously, there's a change in the legislation in March this year, which meant if you're buying a property to rent out or a second property at all, you're seeing a 3% increase. And just to put that in perspective, if you were buying a property last year for 250,000, you'd have paid £2,500 in stamp duty. If you bought the same property for the same price tomorrow, it's now up to 10,000. So as an investor, it does mean that up front you've got to have a lot more cash. You not only need to have your deposit to get your good loan to value on the mortgage, as Paul and his colleagues can advise you, but also you need to have that extra surplus cash up front as well to actually pay the stamp duty to actually buy the property in the first place. And from a tax point of view, obviously you will get relief for the additional stamp duty, but only when you come to sell the property. So again, it's back to Paul's long-term investment. It is a lot of money to put down on a property in addition to the deposit, and it's just being aware that money has to be found in advance, and the tax relief will come, but only on sale in the future. So So that may well be changing people's attitude possibly to investments in property in terms of having X amount of cash available to actually do the transaction.
And is this with us for the long term? I mean, is either Brexit or the position with actual income coming in from stamp duty, are either of those things going to bring about any sort of reform, or is this it for a while?
I think it's a definite government policy to try and dissuade people to actually invest, and hence we've talked about long-term investments rather than a quick return. The effect is that people who are requiring large mortgages for investment are going to suffer as time goes on, as probably Karen can talk about later. But so basically you do need to think of it as a long-term investment because there's a lot of money up front.
Okay, let's talk about foreign investors. I mean, you talked about London, and I believe that one of the reasons that London has become sort of impossible for many people to enter as new buyers is because of the huge amount of foreign investment. Has Brexit made a difference? Is the UK now going to be able to compete? The pound's weak, or is it weak against the dollar? It's weak against the euro. You know.
I think in real terms, any overseas investment now has suddenly got a 15% discount on purchase price because of the sterling price. I was with clients in Manchester and London earlier in the week, and there's more and more and more foreign investment now coming in because of sterling. So I think that's going to go away.
So Alison, what's that doing to the lettings market for the UK?
I mean, from a demand perspective, I mean, any large city is always going to be a somewhere sound to invest in anyway, because there'll always be the demand from a tenancy perspective. From a foreign investments perspective, they do tend to opt London, Manchester, and we've seen a bit of foreign investment actually in Bristol. So I mean, the demand's there. Obviously, that will continue. That does continue to drive prices. But from our perspective, it's more about the stock levels and obviously the return on the investments for those. I mean, we tend to deal with a lot of individual landlords rather than foreign investors. So from that perspective, you know, we tend to advise on a more local basis due to our geographical sort of local knowledge, really.
I think it also proves a bit of confidence in bricks and mortar in the UK economy as well, doesn't it? If people putting money into the UK, you know, it just demonstrates it's a safe haven for investment, rightly or wrongly.
Does that automatically lead to price inflation and therefore the UK buyer can't compete?
I think in certain areas, prime central London, that possibly is the case, absolutely.
Is there a danger of that happening in Bristol, for example?
I don't think so. I mean, from my perspective, I'm not seeing a whole lot of foreign investment coming into Bristol. There is some. Data isn't collected on this point. London, apparently in 2015, there was in the region of 40% foreign investment into London, but that tailed off pre-Brexit and pre-pound falling. But again, I was in London on Tuesday, and I'm hearing, same as you, David, that there is a lot of interest again from overseas coming back into the prime London area, because they have definitely suffered some price adjustments, shall we say, over the last few months in the London area. But that hasn't filtered out. Investment buyers have just actually gone elsewhere. And being in the Surrey area, we're seeing a lot of interest in investments in the Surrey location, which is sort of accessible to London, so the returns are very good. So in that respect, it just hasn't gone away. It cooled off a bit last year, but it seems, I think, picking up again.
Okay, yeah, interesting talking about Surrey, for example. So a question that we were asked by pre this evening to put was a scenario. So I've got £250,000 to spend on a buy-to-let property. I can't afford London. Where do I go? Any of you, or all of you? You've probably got different views. Alison, let's start with you.
I probably wouldn't suggest that I would buy one property at all. I would be suggesting that taking sound financial advice and looking to invest in 2, possibly 3. properties. I mean, with Andrews, we offer a sort of investment service. So actually, rather than looking at particular areas, talking to a local agent, and we turn. We have lots of landlords that do sell and decide not to keep properties long term. So we're always selling investment properties on with tenants in situ, which already have an ongoing rent and yield. So actually using local advice and actually taking on an existing investment property with a tenant in situ, rather than looking at particular areas, is what I would do with it, but actually be looking at investing in 2 or 3 rather than 1.
Okay. I think it also depends on your objective as well. You know, you can buy property for yield, or you can buy it for capital growth. So, you know, there's areas in the UK that you can get in excess of 10% yield. In certain parts of Wales and certain parts of Northern England, you can get in excess of 12% yield. But actually, your capital growth is not going to be great. So it rather depends on what your strategy is. You know, is it for retirement? You know, is it for inheritance tax purposes? And there's a whole host of tax issues around, you know, how you place property, how you buy property, and how it's vested. And yeah, it just depends on your end goal and objective. And financial planning at the end of the day, isn't it, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, my advice to anybody, if you've got a spare $250,000 sitting around, was the question, because I think a lot of people in the room are wanting to property landlords, and with all the changes in tax and everything, I genuinely would go and seek out solid advice as to what you want your money to do. Because it's one thing having a large lump sum, it's another thing getting it to do what you want it to do. And as Alison has said, as David has said, there are a lot of properties out there. It is about getting the maximum return for whatever you want. And as David said, that might be yield, it might be capital growth, it might be for your pension, but I would go and get strong, solid advice from mortgage advisors to see what best suits your circumstances.
Okay, and in terms of tax, Karen, are there advantages for those people out there and at home in the sort of, say, 2-3 plus property bracket, as setting themselves up as a limited company?
I mean, this is probably one of the most common questions I've been asked since about March time, really. And it just depends on your individual circumstances. Like Paul said, you know, it depends what your long-term goal is. If you want to be, you know, selling the properties in a few years' time, then actually maybe holding it as an individual, there's advantages in that way because of capital gains, annual exemptions. Obviously, if you already own the properties, if you do want to consider having a limited company, there's actually tax charges that get in the properties in the company, but it may be that if you're going to buy some more, you may want to consider a company so it acts in 2 different varieties for you. There's lots of different tax scenarios that affect people individually and from the company, and it could well be that maybe a mixture for some people already hold properties going forwards, or maybe actually it's not for them. It does depend on long-term goals, how people are going to be affected by the changes in the mortgage interest relief restriction that's coming in next year. That's you know, making some people focus. Do I want a company because I can claim all of my mortgage relief in the company? It depends. If you're only going to hold it for another couple of years because you plan to sell the rental to help your children buy a property, then that probably isn't the right thing for you to do. So it's individuals will have different reasons for wanting to hold property, what their reasons are long term, and what tax position is best for them realistically now and also over the next few years.
So talk to a tax advisor about your own individual situation.
Yeah, one box doesn't suit all, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay, good. All right, so let's talk about money. So uncertainty with the pound, uncertainty as far as inflation is concerned. What are the best guesses about interest rates? Paul.
Interest rates will go up. The $1 million question is we just don't know when. I doubt, and don't hold me to this, I doubt we'll see the interest rates that we had in the mid-90s because lending is much more balanced now. But I would suspect that at some stage interest rates will rise by 1 or 2%. We are at an all-time low now. So if we were sitting here in 5 years' time, I would guess that after Brexit and a bit of settling down and everything, interest rates will be round about a couple of % higher than they are now. Of course, I could be wrong.
Within 5 years.
Within 5 years. But that's my personal view. If we go back 12 months, there was all talk about interest rates suddenly shooting up, then they came down. So it just depends where all the markets are. But we have been at an all-time low now for a long, long time. So to coin an old phrase, whatever goes down eventually will go up. Sorry.
Just wondered what your opinion was with what was happening in the media this week about the election of Donald Trump, and there's a lot of talk that will actually have quite a media impact on things like interest rates.
Okay. Well, the American election has been very interesting because not 2 weeks ago Hillary Clinton was going to get in and it was going to be like this, and it didn't happen, so it's going to be like that. What tends to happen after all sorts of elections, things settle down. Once everybody's had their say, it all settles down. And the reality is, it's not in anybody's interests for inflation to suddenly shoot through the roof or interest rates to go up. So I don't think the American election today is going to have an immediate impact on where we are. Where that might be in 12 months' time or 2 years' time, depending upon world events, might be different. But today, I think we're in a fairly settled, regular place. That's my personal opinion.
And Martin, assuming that with the rise of interest rates comes the rise of mortgage rates, they tend to follow pretty quickly, will that automatically lead to a depression in sales?
I guess, from my personal point of view, it depends on just how far they rise. A small adjustment, as it's been suggested, is not going to affect dramatically the market's place, in my opinion. It's difficult. The market isn't just about mortgage rates. It's about sentiment, it's about supply, and it's about demand. And it's very difficult to predict how things will go. People are obviously worried about it, and I can understand why. But we have a fairly robust marketplace, and some would say it's because of the supply and demand issues. It is very hard to predict where we are. But as things stand, if the interest rates were only to go up a % or so, I don't think it would make a lot of difference. The demand to buy is still very strong.
David? You agree?
I think it's back to this long-term game, isn't it, at the end of the day? I mean, I agree with both my colleagues. I don't think interest rates are going to go up massively at all in the next 5 years. I think... For any government to risk a huge rise in interest rates is problematic for the wider economy. Yes, of course, it will affect property. Property is a marketplace at the end of the day, and if there's a significant pressure on interest rates, yes, of course, prices will reflect that. But I think because of our significant lack of supply of properties at the moment, actually, I don't think there'd be too much change. Because, of course, landlords will come back into the marketplace if prices come down. So, it would certainly balance things out.
Mm-hmm. And, I mean, if you were giving advice now to first-time buyers, what would it be?
I think from my perspective, particularly with the Help to Buy schemes that are available, the government are very keen to help first-time buyers onto the property ladder, hence why we have the stamp duty issues as much as anything else. I think it's a good as time as any to buy. Obviously, I can't commit or comment on the future any more than anyone else. But in terms of the cost of a mortgage as opposed to renting, the cost of renting, a lot of people actually invariably save money by buying because of the interest rates where they are. And obviously, Paul can discuss lots of different schemes that are available mortgage-wise, which can protect them in the short term as well. So it's a good as time as any.
Do you agree with that, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, your question was, what advice would I give to first-time buyers? I would say we deal with a lot of first-time buyers, and they all come to us pretty much with the same mindset. Most first-time buyers aren't really aware of what there is available to borrow and what the rates are, and that's buy-to-lets and normal residential first-time buyers. The mortgage rates are very, very favourable at the moment for everyone, including first-time buyers, and they have been for a long time. But my general advice to first-time buyers is, if you're going to get a residential mortgage, probably get the maximum deposit you possibly can, because that will, in most cases, end up with you getting a slightly better mortgage rate. Go to a proper mortgage advisor, and remember, the mortgage advisor works for you. It's their job to give you the very best advice. So don't be afraid to ask any questions you think you need to ask, because at the end of the day, it's your money. You know, it's not like buying a car. It's not. This is a huge long-term commitment. It's a long-term commitment. You know, you will never ever spend more money on anything than this house. So you need to find out everything you can. Good advisors will give you good advice, but actually for first-time buyers, it generally isn't as expensive as you probably think it is. But there is a lack of knowledge of what you can and what you can't do. And then the next bit of advice I would give, it's one thing getting the mortgage, it's another thing keeping the house. So think about what would happen if something happened to you, like you became unemployed, became ill, how would you pay the bills? Because you worked so hard for that property, you wouldn't want it taken away from you because of something outside of your control. And that's what advisors do. They are there to work for you. And that would be my advice.
Thank you.
Just an extra point there, and just obviously I was chatting to somebody before the evening started. So obviously if you are going from maybe renting in a shared house to buying your own property, just a reminder that if you do buy a property and have a spare bedroom, there's the renter room relief, which means that you can rent that second room to a friend or a colleague, and the income is tax-free. So it's a way of, buying that bigger house, maybe having the extra room or two, and you can actually receive rent on that. You don't need to disclose it to the revenue, as long as it's not excessive, but it's a way of maybe just helping towards, the running cost of the property. So it's where you can have the income without having to pay tax.
And that applies to the Airbnb market and the Monday to Friday.com market and all those different markets.
Airbnb is slightly different. The main crux of the renter room relief is that it is your home and you are living there. So if you buy a property and you live there and you've got a friend who also lives there and then pays you rent month, that's very different. If you're going to run it as a possible classic Airbnb, whereas actually, for 3 months you go travelling and you rent it, that's a very different area. But on a day-to-day, having somebody else living in the property with you who pays you rent, that is a way of maybe enabling you to buy that property. It's not taxable income. The rates have just gone up. So it's a way of maybe, taking that step from maybe the shared accommodation to having your own place, but having, that extra income coming in to help with the mortgage.
That's great advice. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, there must be questions, I think, now from the audience. So I'm going to try to include you. So please, hands up and we'll get a microphone to you. Yes, over there.
Can I ask on that last point that Karen was making, directed at Paul, as to what the level of flexibility with lending to first-time buyers, taking into account that income and allowing them to rent that second bedroom?
Okay, so my advice on that would be, it goes back to what I was saying. If you're going to borrow whatever you're going to borrow, work out how much you think you can pay and speak to an advisor to see what the options are based upon what Karen was saying for yourselves. What Karen suggested, a lot of first-time buyers don't even think of that. They don't even think of those sort of things. That's why it's important to sit down and talk to people about what the options are.